So Randy, you gave your number 2, which was addiction to busyness. Mine is going to be a version of that.
Okay.
And so it's going to be all about this. So I'm going to give you the first version of it, and then I got a part 2 to it.
Okay.
So part 1 is with leaders, the difficulty with being an editor and not an author. And what I mean by that is in the seat of leader and direct report, there's always one person who's the author and one person who's the editor. Okay. And in a perfect world, and if you want to maximize your use of your time and be the highest and best use of your role as a leader, you should be the editor. And so it makes perfect sense when you think about it. So you think about all your favorite all-time direct reports. When there was a problem or issue, they probably came to you and they said, hey, Randy, there's an issue. Here's what I think we should do about it. I'd love to get your thoughts. They're authoring and you're editing. And you're not so highly effective direct reports, your less than effective ones, would come to you and say, hey, Randy, there's an issue. What do you want me to do about it? And then if you're not careful, you jump in and you're authoring and now they're editing you. Like, well, it's not my fault. It didn't work out. Randy told me to do it that way. And I find my leaders really not only struggle with that distinction, but they like being authors. Oh, yeah. They like being the heroes.
Yes.
I was interviewing an owner of a business, retail business, a few weeks ago, and he said it was part of a larger retail chain. So I was interviewing him for this presentation I'm doing, and he said his advice was, you got to be real careful to not be the hero, because when you are the hero, you're creating chaos. You're reinforcing it because you're just telling people just come to you for all the problems and solutions, and then you'll just do it all. And I find that people really want to be the firefighter and the hero, but they're not equipping their people below them to step up. And it's kind of an addiction to busyness.
Yes.
It's the addiction to that high of I fixed today, I solved the problem, when they need to be kind of equipping their folks below them.
And then they wonder later, why am I always bogged down? Why can't I elevate myself? Why am I always in the weeds? I mean, you kind of hear these things. Well, how often are you actively taking over your employees' work? I mean, how often are you doing the job for them? And I find that's often the case.
Yeah. When really the antidote is simple and hard. The antidote is simple. When someone comes to you and says, it's really this simple and this hard. They come to you and say, what do you want me to do about this? How do you want me to fix this? You should pause and say, I tell you what, put your best thoughts around that. Come back to me tomorrow. Maybe put it down on a page and let's talk about it. And then we'll figure out what next step forward. Make them put some thinking into it. Make them author so you can edit. This requires a little bit of pause and patience. But that's, like I said, simple and hard.
Have you been in the room for some of my conversations with my youngest son? That's exactly how I do it.
That's exactly. Wow. This is parenting too.
It is.
So I told you I was going to flip this one.
Okay.
So I also find my clients struggle with being editors and not authors. And here's what I mean by that. So when they are then going up to their boss, they need to be authoring and putting their boss in the editor seat. They need to be going to their boss and treating that conversation. Be prepared for it and treat it like a trusted advisor. Hey, boss, here's what's been going on. Here are 3 options and the cost benefit of each option. I'd love to talk these through with you. So put your thinking down on paper and take it when you communicate up and take that to them versus just saying, what do you want me to do about that?
Do you find that your clients sometimes struggle with that dichotomy? You act this way here, but you've got to, kind of think differently about working with your boss. Is there a challenge that you've seen with your clients, or do they get it?
I think they get it when they teach so what happens is if they are teaching their direct reports to author and they edit, then they get that they should be authoring and putting their boss in the editor seat. Okay. But when they don't do that, then they allow their directs to treat them like authors, then they think their boss should be the author. So then they go to their boss, what do you want me to do about it? And consequently, they don't look strategic. They don't look like they're prepared. They just don't look like they're ready for the next promotion, frankly. So when you operate like an author and put your boss in the editor seat, you're signaling to him or her, I'm prepared, I've got my stuff together, and I'm ready for the next role. And it's funny, when I get my clients to do that, it's not uncommon. They get promoted within about 6 months because their peers aren't doing that.
What's the role that really good communication plays in all of that? Like really good, open, honest communication. I mean, how critical is it? And do you find that is one of the first things you have to really, kind of coach them on is the need to communicate openly and clearly when they're going back and forth.
Yeah, so it's really important to clarify their expectations down.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's where clear communication is really important.
Mm-hmm.
So to their directs. And this is kind of like coaching. Like when you come to me,
Mm-hmm.
you should come prepared.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's me trusting you in your thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to talk through that because I value your thinking. So you need to communicate why.
Mm-hmm.
So communicate your expectations and why. When you're communicating up, it's slightly different. It's not so much about communicating your expectations as much as coming in with very structured communication, structured thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Because part of how you're being evaluated by a senior leader is your logic. How structured is your thinking? You come with a very, clear, is your thinking clear?
Mm-hmm.
I had a leader several years ago who I was working with. He was a VP of tax and he reported to the CFO of a very big company. And her issue was like a lot of folks that learned a background that was very detail oriented,
Mm-hmm.
like
Mm-hmm.
accounting, he literally, Randy, you would have choked on the documents he would give her. He would give her a document and it would have 50 to 100 bullets on each page. And it would be like 3 pages of 50 to 100 bullets, not like sub-organized, like an outline, just like straight up 50 bullets.
You lost me at tax.
Yeah. And he would do this and be like, here's all the important stuff.
Yeah.
But there's no structure, there's no organization, he's not leading his leader.
Right. He's sharing data.
He's sharing data, but he's not advising.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you treat your leader like they're your number one client?
Mm-hmm.
Because they are.
Mm-hmm. That's a great perspective.
They can decide to renew your contract or not. So you treat them like a client. You come to them with a client document that's there to direct them and guide them and lead them.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my number 2. It's that author editor distinction and knowing what seat to sit in. And if you do it well, it can save you so much time. If you don't do it well, it's going to cost you lots.
I love it.
Okay, so now we are at number 1. What's your number 1?
I think it's going to be a slightly different variation of your number 3. So
Okay.
my number 1 is underestimating the value of building trusting stakeholder relationships. Underestimating the value of building trusting stakeholder relationships. So one of the things I do with all of my coaching clients near the beginning of the relationship is we do a little brainstorming session on identifying who are all the key stakeholders that you serve. They can be under you, they can be peers, they can be clients in the organization, outside the organization. Let's make the list. So once we've identified who they are, I've actually developed a tool called a relationship audit template, where I give them this very handy form where they can go in and grade the quality of the relationship with each one of these people. And typically on a scale of 1 to 10 is what we focus on. Anything less than an 8, we want to put together a very specific plan to help them improve it. But one of the things I find interesting is helping them understand why this is important. So I just start asking questions at the beginning of the relationship. Are you as influential as you'd like to be? Are you having the influence that you think you should have in the organization? And if I get yes, I'll ask why, but I often get, well, not really. Well, let's talk about why you don't. And often it's because they're operating in silos and they're not investing in building relationships with their colleagues. So helping people understand the importance of this is really critical, but I go much further and I help them actually break them down, and then we work on specific actions to make each one of them better. And much of it's what you identified. You have to invest time. You have to go have meals with these people. You have to be vulnerable. You have to be willing to talk a little bit about the things in your life that aren't going well. It's not all happy days, everything's wonderful. You have to be personal.
Yeah.
You have to be authentic. You have to be curious. So I'm teaching some of those basic building blocks of relationships that you and I've talked about many times, and we both do in the Leadership Foundry. But as I'm working with people, I find that just the lack of understanding at the very beginning of a relationship that this is really part of my job and I can't be successful long-term unless I do it, that's usually a switch that I have to help them flip on.
Yeah. So do you find, is there a certain kind of seat or that they struggle with recognizing the importance of more than another? What I mean by that is, like, do they tend to overlook peers, or do they tend to overlook senior leaders that are more diagonally from them, or is it other stakeholders, or is there no real theme and pattern to it?
No, actually, it's a great question. I think within the vertical of, let's say, their particular operating unit, so their boss, maybe their peers, and maybe their team, I think there's a general decent awareness that I need to make sure I've got good relationships there. But you used the word earlier, silos. I think we're talking about silos and collaboration.
Yeah.
But getting outside of my vertical to play well in the sandbox with marketing, with sales, with finance and accounting, with HR, and building relationships with my clients, my stakeholders in each of those organizations or departments, that's where there's a big letdown. That's where people are not putting enough energy. And you have to help them understand that if you want to be a successful leader and truly grow your career, your influence in your vertical is going to limit you unless you expand it. You have to be willing to go outside of that and truly build an organization-wide series of relationships. So I find that the lack of understanding and the lack of willingness to do that's kind of pronounced at the beginning, but we usually bring that down and help them understand it and give them the tools to do it.
Yeah, I love the way you set that up too, that I had never really thought of, but it's so simple and so brilliant. And I'm almost, don't know if this is exactly how you said it, but this is how I interpreted it in my brain. Was almost thinking about those key stakeholders and then rating them first on a scale of 1 to 10 on importance, and then rating them second on how you're doing on each of those. So if you got one that's an importance of 10 and you're a 5, that's a problem. You might have another one that's an importance of a 5 and you're a 5, and that's okay. But you're looking for those gaps. I love that. I think that's so simple.
And there's so much in my coaching around role play. Because I find that, I asked you earlier, are you equipping them to go to these conversations? We spend a lot of time on essential tactics. What do you say? We were sitting down across from your boss's boss who's granted you a meeting, and you know that you've got to have a relationship. What do you say? So I find that that's where we put a lot of energy, but it's extremely helpful.
The tactics is really important.
That's
what eventually, because that's what people are going to then go try and do.
I've been writing scripts for 20 years, and I just find that people need the language.
Yeah, absolutely.
What?